What will you pack? What will you pack as we go on this journey together? Will you reach back to your perhaps not yet unpacked luggage from your last trip and say, I bet this will still work. This is not dirty yet. I bet these will be the tools to get me to that future I long for. What will you pack? Will you remember what your grandmother packed or her grandmother packed? The tools that got them to where you are today, giving you an opportunity to now look forward? What will you pack for this journey ahead? Is it tools from the past, tools from the present, clothing and things that bring us joy now, or perhaps bring us burden now? Or will we let go of some of those things, some of those tools, those items for the journey, and look to a different place? I will pack the hopes of tomorrow. I will pack my daughter's laughter and all of the pain of children who don't laugh as often. I will look to the future for the things that I will pack, and perhaps together we may pack the things we will need. For whatever comes our way, we will have one another on that journey. And perhaps then, when we pack for the future, we can lead this community, this congregation, all of us, to that place for which we so long. Well, it's that time of our week again where we dive into our wonder and we think about our imagination and the tools that might be very helpful for us as we head into the topics of today, that we build on the conversations of Friday night and Saturday, and we think about our shared future together. And so I will look for my wonder box. Oh, here it is. And what, oh my gosh, would you look at this? Wow. Is this a collector's edition of Back to the Future trilogy? I can't be the only one who has this on their Christmas list circa, God, 2008, 2005. Good thing my mother wrote my name on it so I didn't lose it. Thank you very much. Back to the Future, if you're not familiar, is one of my absolute favorite movies and movie trilogies. It is about a young teenager, perhaps when I started getting interested in it, a little older than me, and this wildly imaginative Doc Brown. And they go on wild adventures. They go back to the past, they go to the future, they go back to the future, and then out of a wild money-grabbing scheme from the producers, they make a third movie and they go back to the Wild Wild West, which I still like. Mary Steenburgen, she's great. Back to the Future is something I was thinking about as I was talking with Sue about the service for today, because she is going to be talking about leading from the future. Leading from the future. And I was thinking to this and thinking about all their adventures and thinking about one line that kind of courses through the whole three-part trilogy. I wonder if you know what this line is. I'm actually going to share a 30-second clip that might remind you why this movie is so iconic.
Great Scott! 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 Oh, Great Scott! Great Scott! Great Scott!
Great Scott! I never knew what it meant until I looked up this term today. Maybe some of you were around back in the day when this was a little more common, but none of you were around in the mid 1800s when it was very common. And I was doing a little research here, and get this. Let me pull this up here. Great Scott not only refers to these two Scottish, people, and that's all interesting, but it almost had this sort of wonderful nature to it, almost like a cognitive dissonance when you would say it. It was an epiphany of sorts. And if you watch these movies, it very much is kind of this concept of Doc Brown, and then at that huge humorous final one where Marty actually says it's about like realizing something related to either the future and the past and the present that reminds them of something. As Marty says, what Marty's catchphrase is, "Whoa, that's heavy." That's another one. I don't know if any of you said "that's heavy" growing up. But I was looking back, and in 1864, here's one of the earlier pieces. A Union soldier wrote in a memoir that was later published in a memoir, "Great Scott, who would have thought that this would be the destiny of the Union volunteer?" Great Scott, who would have thought that this would be the destiny of a Union volunteer? Or here's another one. This was in a medical journal. It said, "Great Scott, mystery upon mystery, marvel upon marvel." I just love this idea of Great Scott and all of these people that it may refer to, but how we might reclaim that idea of something that spurs in us a connection point between something here and now and something at the leading edge of our lives together that calls us to notice, to pause, to exclaim, to take seriously what is before us. So I'm sure we'll have a Back to the Future movie night back when we're all back in the future, when we're all vaccinated. I think that's a low-hanging fruit, if anything, from this time for all ages. But I hope that you find ways to exclaim, to find a moment where you're noticing something that connects you perhaps way to your past generations, to where you are today, and to the future generations 7 from now. I hope that is the case. And I hope that today, with Sue's help, we'll be able to think a little bit more about how we can lead back to the future. Not all visions are equal. Some never get beyond the motherhood and apple pie stage. Good ideas that unleash no energy for change. Others transform the world. There is nothing more powerful than an idea whose time has come, said Victor Hugo 150 years ago. Yet the power Hugo refers to remains elusive, carefully guarded by a paradox. There's nothing more personal than a vision, yet the visions that ultimately prove transformative have nothing to do with us as individuals. The seeds for this transformation lie in seeing our reality more clearly, without preconceptions and judgments. When we learn to see our part in creating things that we don't like, but that are likely to continue, we can begin to develop a different relationship with our problems. We're no longer victims. When we become open to what might be possible, and we're inevitably led to the question, so what do we want to create? But the we in this statement is the larger we, the visions that arise out of genuine pre-sensing, comes from the field knowing itself, a spontaneous expression of discovering the power to shape our reality and our responsibility to an emerging future. By contrast, many visions are doomed from the outset because those who articulate them, whether consciously or not, are coming from a place of powerlessness. If we believe that someone else has created our present reality, what is the basis for believing that we can create a different reality in the future? The problem with most attempts to formulate visions is that people formulate visions that are disconnected from a shared understanding of present reality and a sense of shared responsibility for that reality. If people are still externalizing their problems, they create, in a sense, externalized visions, which amount to a kind of change strategy for fixing problems which they have not yet seen their part in creating. Only when people begin to see from within the forces that shape their reality and to see their part in how those forces might evolve does vision become powerful. Everything else, everything else is just a vague hope.
It's good to be with you here today. This process that we engaged in this weekend started almost 2 years ago. So your team and I have been in conversation, and they've been in conversation with you. And finally, we got here to do this online. So this weekend, we've been exploring cultural competency and intercultural development. A lot of big words. The question is, what does it mean to be a culturally competent community? And how do we recognize our dominant culture? What are the characteristics of this culture? And how do these qualities either serve us or get in the way of the work that we're called to do together? So I thought I would start with an illustration of cultural competency. This was written by a man who was interviewing for a very high-powered consultant for an agency. And he says, "This week, I had the privilege of doing a video interview with a candidate. And as soon as the camera turned on, she scurried a child off her lap, looked embarrassingly and apologetically to the camera, and shared that she was having childcare issues because her childcare was closed due to COVID. I smiled and offered her two options. We could reschedule the interview at a time that was better for her, or we could continue the interview with her kiddo on her lap. I made it clear that neither would have a negative impact on her candidacy. She opted to bring her child back into her lap. So I called my 3-year-old to come and sit in my lap as well, because I'm also having childcare hiccups due to COVID, and my kids are home on quarantine. I could see the weight drop from her shoulders. She lifted her head with pride. She nailed every question. We laughed a lot. The kids had a blast making faces at each other. She got a job offer because she was a smart, competent, and qualified to do the job at a high level. Just because we've been at this for almost a year doesn't mean we don't need to continue to lead with empathy and grace. Cultural competency is responding with empathy, grace, and compassion. That's why this discussion belongs in our faith community. These are spiritual values. As we practice these, we grow in wisdom and into our mission. This is why it's important we recognize who we are and the work we're called to do in this world with our whole human family. As I reviewed this unusual and disturbing year, several things stand out for me. You have to remember I'm in Richmond, Virginia. And I find it hard to believe we can go through this time without seeing the hard reality of Black lives in this country. I live in Richmond, so my cultural challenges are centered around Black Lives Matter. Yours may be different, but the challenges remain. How can we create systems which are diverse, inclusive, and equitable. Perhaps the quarantine time slowed us down enough to notice what's been happening to Black people in this country forever. The hard reality of the Confederate flag, names and statues, the effect on our Black lives is obvious. Some progress has been made, but not enough to quell the uprising of the far right, who are trying to hold on to white supremacy. The recent violence at the Capitol illustrated once again the inequity in the treatment of Black protesters versus white rioters. The false equivalency of the two events was declared and challenged. Black lives matter precisely because of how little they matter, demonstrated in the way we treat them daily. This is harsh, I know, but it's the reality of our world and this country. Another thing is that this winter has increasingly shown us that climate change is real. It's hard to deny after the year we've had. Wildfires, floods, storms, record heat, ice storms, rising waters. We are handing the next generation a huge crisis. We are teetering on the brink of being able to reverse some of the damage we've done in the name of progress. I don't think I have to say much about this, except listen to the concerns of the younger people who are inheriting this earth. And finally, showing up matters. As an ally at a demonstration, to vote, to get out the vote, to challenge our systemic and institutional racism, showing up matters in this pandemic. We show up to help our neighbors. We show up to protect one another by listening to the guidelines on how to be safe. We show up for our vaccinations. We show up for our community. This is not a pretty picture, and neither is it hopeless. Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. calls us to the journey of moving toward beloved community. There are two things required of us to journey toward beloved community. The first work is a vision of beloved community, and the second is to embrace our calling. As the reading said, visions need to be formed out of a shared understanding of present reality and a shared responsibility for that reality. Visions need to be formed out of a shared understanding of present reality and a shared responsibility for that reality. In other words, we cannot say, this is not who we are. It may not be who we want to be, but this is who we are. It means stepping into a space described by Desmond Tutu. He said, "We are all flawed and all human. We all have made mistakes and harmed others. We will again. We find it easier to practice forgiveness when we can recognize that the roles could have been reversed. Each of us could have been the perpetrator rather than the victim. Each of us has the capacity to commit the wrongs against others that were committed against us. Although I might say I would never, genuine humility will answer, never say never. Rather say, I hope that given the same set of circumstances, I would not. But can we ever really know? This is a difficult place to be because it requires us to see our reality without preconceptions and judgments. This is what our Commission on Institutional Change and Widening the Circle is asking us to do. And as our reading said about vision, it has to unleash energy for change. And the paradox is that there is nothing more personal than a vision, yet visions that prove transformative have nothing to do with us as individuals. Dr. Martin Luther King's vision: the end is reconciliation, the end is redemption, the end is the creation of beloved community. It is this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It is the type of understanding goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. It is this love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men. His vision of beloved community is for the whole world, the entire planet. This is the vision he asked us to embrace, his legacy to us, the work he commands us to do. The question then is how? Where do we begin? What's the plan? Who's in charge? It's all a bit overwhelming and yet critical to our survival. We need to begin with a shared understanding of present reality and a shared sense of responsibility for that reality. This world is who we are. How do we begin our work together? To find the shared sense of present reality, we have to listen to our family, friends, strangers, enemies to experience their present reality. We do this by listening with open hearts and open minds, empathy and grace and compassion. When we approach our neighbors, we must do it having examined our assumptions and preconceptions. Who do we think they are? And then we need to let it go and encounter one another with open hearts, letting our hearts and minds sense their present reality and merge it with ours. That's what my example of cultural competency did. The gentleman let go of his preconceptions of what an interview should be and encountered his potential employee with an open heart and open mind and sensed their present reality and let it merge with his. This is how visions are born. Visions that include everyone's reality and visions that engage us in shared responsibility of that reality. This is painful work and exciting work as we discover the power to shape our responsibility, our reality, and our responsibility to an emerging future. We know what happens when we try to fix problems, but don't see our part in creating it. This is an evolutionary journey, step by step. Beloved community is a journey, not a destination. Our journey as Unitarian Universalists to become anti-oppressive, anti-racist, and multicultural in our community has taught us that many of the challenges were created by us and our systemic racism, our white privilege. So what do we want to create? What kind of world do we want to leave to our children and our children's children? This is not a vision of me as an individual, but of we, the entire world. What is our heart's desire for our world, our whole human family, and all beings? Martin Luther King's vision was a vision for the world, shared vision, shared responsibility, reconciliation and redemption, the end, the creation of beloved community. First, we must listen to ourselves, join a conversation with our hearts and minds open, listening for our shared reality. That's what we'll do this afternoon. Listen for our shared reality of what we hope this community becomes, what it's living into in its creativity. Rilke said, love the questions, not the answers, and that one day we may live into them. Let's create a vision with everyone at the table. Who would you put at the table? Is there a vision for your community or your city that includes the wealthiest and the poorest residents? Is there a vision that includes all ages? Is there a vision that includes documented and undocumented, housed and unhoused, employed and unemployed, differently abled, all faith communities, all nationalities, all genders, all generations? As we extend our heart energy to all of these people, can you feel the power? And how are you called to do or be in birthing this vision? This pandemic has provided an opportunity to deeply listen to one another in our communities and to deepen our commitment as a faith community to creating a diverse, equitable, and inclusive institution. I want to ask you how it feels to live into these commitments. Although the challenge troubles our souls, the work opens our hearts. We show up, we hear our call to serve, and we show up for our neighbors, for one another, for our faith communities. Can you imagine what the map would look like if we all posted our service to the community and the world? All the work that we are currently doing as individuals? In a coffee hour at my church, I listened to a young adult encourage an elder to explore the League of Women Voters. She sang the praises of the work they do. She's committed to sustainable living. The work of one person inspires me. The works of hundreds of us inspires awe. Let us not be discouraged. Beloved community is a journey we're all on together. To listen without assumptions, judgments, and with our hearts and minds open. To discover our shared vision that we have the power to create. Only when people begin to see the forces that shape their reality and to see their part and how those forces might evolve does vision become powerful. Everything else is just a vague hope. From Martin Luther King. The end is reconciliation, the end is redemption, the end is the creation of the beloved community. It's this type of spirit and this type of love that can transform opponents into friends. It's this type of understanding, goodwill that will transform the deep gloom of the old age into the exuberant gladness of the new age. This is the love which will bring about miracles in the hearts of men. Amen. May it be so.